I am back in Miami, and it feels fantastic to be back here in my old neighborhood. And today I'm walking down North Shore Drive here in Miami Beach, and it's like 77 degrees. Sun just started peeking out, and really couldn't be better. And it feels really great to be back home. And I'm glad I'm back home where the real estate madness is usually happening, right here in Miami, to talk about the real estate madness that was just introduced by President Trump, because he wants to have a 50-year mortgage, which is probably the worst idea regarding real estate that I have heard in a really long time, guys. And several of you who watch my channel actually wrote me an email to express the same sentiment about how this is just going to make the housing market even more jacked up than it already is. And I know this is going to get people fired up, but I'm just going to go ahead and say it. You know, the 50-year mortgage is one of the worst ideas to ever hit the housing market conversation. But at the same time, I'm not surprised, because many of you guys, as well as myself, predicted this would happen at some point, because already a couple of years ago, the FHA decided to start extending people's mortgages from 30-year mortgages to 40-year mortgages for people who could not afford it, and requested financial assistance, or they requested a loan modification. Certain FHA borrowers have been able to get their 30-year loans turned into 40-year loans in order to make it more affordable. And so the same idea is what's being used to present the 50-year mortgage. But I'm going to show you guys the math, the risk, and all the hidden consequences behind this on why it is such a bad idea. It's not just an opinion. Mathematically, it's a bad idea. But before we talk about the 50-year mortgage, let's cover a brief history of the 30-year mortgage and how we got to this point we're at right now in 2025. You know, the 30-year mortgage dates back to the 1940s. It was pretty much the government's way of jump-starting construction and giving families a chance to buy homes after World War II. And by the late 1950s, it became the go-to loan product that pretty much everyone used. And today, more than 90% of buyers choose a 30-year loan. Why did they do this? Well, because it is predictable and it's easy to qualify for. But here's the part that a lot of people forget or fail to recognize when going for these longer loan terms, is that every single type of mortgage, including a 30-year mortgage, is front-loaded with interest, meaning that the first 15 years you have that mortgage, you are paying more in interest than your actual principal payment, which means you're not reducing your loan balance by a whole lot for the first half of that loan term. And since the average homeowner, as of 2025, only keeps their property for about 12 years, most people barely make a dent in their loan before they sell the house and start the whole process over again. And in case you didn't know, there are other types of mortgages out there. There are also 15-year mortgages, and the 15-year mortgage can actually save you a significant amount of money in interest payments over the life of the loan. But why don't people choose it? Well, because the 15-year mortgage requires you to basically make way more income to buy and qualify for the same house. Here's an example. If you look at a $500,000 house at a 6% interest rate, which is pretty close to what we're at right now, the 30-year payment would be $2,400 a month, but the 15-year payment would be $3,300 a month, a whopping $900 a month more. And in order to qualify for that 15-year payment, you would need to earn around $10,000 a month instead of only $7,500 a month to get the 30-year mortgage. So people naturally choose the lower payment so they can qualify to buy more house, and they get more flexibility. And who can blame them, right? You know, if you can get a bigger and nicer house and a lower monthly payment, it's kind of a no-brainer for most people, and they just don't worry about the interest, especially since you can deduct a good chunk of that as a homeowner against your annual income off your tax return. So when people hear the term 50-year mortgage, they think immediately, well, great, if the 30-year mortgage made housing even more affordable back in the 40s, well, it's going to do the same thing right now in 2025. But that's actually not true, because when you go from a 30-year loan to a 50-year loan, it only increases affordability by, get this, 8%. That's it, 8%. Meanwhile, if you go from a 15-year mortgage to a 30-year mortgage, it increases affordability by 34%. So extending your loan an additional 20 years only gets you a tiny little bit extra of buying power, but an absolutely monstrous amount of additional interest you have to pay over the life of the loan. And I'm so glad we're back in Miami to see some of these crazy real estate deals that are being offered here. Take a look at this house here, guys. Here's a house that was purchased back in 2017 for $2.886 million, almost 2.9, already a crazy amount of money pre-pandemic. But then they listed it for sale in May of this year, so before I even left to go to California, for $6.75 million, and I've already cut the price over $650,000 since listing, and it's still sitting here available. Typical Miami listings that sit on the market for potentially years and don't move. I did see some listings over there in California like that, but this is pretty common over here. And I'm sure we're gonna run into a whole lot more of them as I keep making videos here. So let's get into the math of why the 50-year mortgage is a horrible idea, okay? The longer the loan term, the higher the interest rate you end up paying, because lenders are taking on more risk by giving you a longer loan term, because they're essentially tying up more capital than they need to in order to give you that loan. So there's an opportunity cost for these lenders, and naturally they're going to charge you for that. If you go for a 15-year loan right now, you could get a 5.3% rate. If you go for a 30-year loan, you could get a 6.1% rate. But if you were getting a 50-year mortgage, you could be looking at a 7% or more rate. So if you take a $500,000 loan at 30 years at 6%, that's $3,000 a month. If you take a 50-year mortgage at 7%, you're actually paying $8 more per month at $3,008 a month. So a 50-year mortgage could actually be more expensive and cost you more each month than the traditional 30-year mortgage right now. Who in the world is going to go for that? And how does anybody think that's a good idea? You know, when you see these crazy messages and ideas out there, it just gets people amped up, but they don't realize how stupid it actually is until you run the numbers. And even in a dream scenario where, let's say, the interest rate is actually the same, they're not going to charge more, they're not going to charge a premium for a 50-year over a 30-year mortgage, your payment only drops from $3,000 a month to about $2,632 a month. It's like a 10% discount for doubling the loan term. And so if you need a 10% discount off of your mortgage payment that badly, that's not really a mortgage issue that can be fixed. That is a housing affordability issue, which is something I continue to hammer on the channel. That's why this 50-year mortgage is a horrible idea, because mortgage rates or the loan terms that are currently being offered have never been the problem, but they're continually perpetuated as the enemy of housing affordability, but the math doesn't jive. And the worst part is, it's not even that there's not a huge savings off the monthly payment, but it's actually really bad for you as the home buyer when it comes to building equity, because the first decade of a 50-year mortgage is going to be pretty much purely interest. If you were to buy a $550,000 home with 10% down, and you have the house for about 12 years, which is what people typically do right now, you've only paid off about $32,000 off the principal. So if home values go down even just a little bit, you're instantly underwater. And if the market stays flat, you walk away with less than your actual down payment. You are going to come out negative when you sell the house. You're going to have to come to the closing table with money. You will literally lose money after owning the house for a decade. Think about that. Everybody believes, well, if I just hold on to the house for long enough, then I'm going to come out ahead financially, and that typically has always been true. But if we get an actual 50-year mortgage, that same rule is no longer going to apply. That's completely out the window, guys. That's done. And the typical rule of thumb with lenders is they typically like to give you that longer loan term because they're going to earn more in interest. But in this case, it doesn't even work out well for them either. And here's why. Because if the rates were to go down, then a homeowner can refinance. But if rates go up, the bank is stuck with a low yield loan for half of a century. And mortgage investors, people who buy the mortgage-backed securities, forget it. A 50-year mortgage blows that up completely. The risk is too high and the returns are too low, and nobody in the secondary market wants that exposure. So who is going to buy 50-year mortgages packaged up as a mortgage-backed security? Probably nobody. And let's not forget, something I covered a little over a week ago is that the average first-time home buyer today is now 40 years old. And if you were to buy a house with a 50-year mortgage, that means if you were to actually stay in your house, you would not pay it off until you're 90 years old. By the time that house is finally owned free and clear, your grandkids might be thinking about retirement. But if the current administration wants to improve housing affordability, this just isn't the way, and they should be looking at more sensible solutions. Like, for example, they could raise the capital gains exclusion to $1 million indexed to inflation. And if they were to do this, then that would essentially unlock so many new listings, because that's one of the main reasons a lot of people who have owned their homes for a long time do not want to sell today. Also, they could allow people to port their existing mortgage to their next home. So people with a 2 to 3% mortgage rate could start moving again. They could also increase the mortgage interest deduction for new loans, which would encourage more construction and better mobility. And these are the real solutions that could potentially help out with housing affordability. Anything that would cause more people to list their homes for sale and increase inventory even further, because there's this big myth that we have a housing shortage, guys. And somebody just made a comment about this the other day, like, Michael, why are all the news channels talking about there's still a housing shortage, but you say there isn't? Well, it's just simple math as well, guys. It's facts, okay? You look at the inventory levels, we are pretty much back to pre-pandemic levels of inventory. I think we're only 10% below where we were in 2019 on a nationwide average. And if there was a shortage of housing, then all of the homes that are on the market would be getting sold. But instead, the demand hasn't been this low in over 30 years, and people are not buying houses. And the main reason is because they are unaffordable. Yeah, sure, there's a lot of houses for sale, but many of them people cannot afford, which means sellers are either going to have to hang on to those homes indefinitely, or they're going to have to bring the prices back down to reality where people can afford. So let me just make something crystal clear. A 50-year mortgage doesn't make homes more affordable. It doesn't help the borrower. It doesn't help investors. And it definitely does not help the housing market. It's just a gimmick at best. And it's something that sounds good on social media, but collapses the moment you run the numbers. If this ever actually becomes a reality and mainstream, we're going to see people locked into loans that they can never escape from, and people are going to lose more money than ever when they start buying real estate. You're going to have no equity, you're going to have record amounts of debt, and you are going to die with a massive balance on your mortgage.